The first thing to go wasn't the lights, it was the sound. One moment my house was an island of defiant civilization in the face of the biblical thunderstorm hammering whispering pines, the low guttural roar of the wind, the percussive drumming of rain on the roof, the bass-heavy thud of distant thunder, and underneath it all, the gentle, reassuring hum of my life's work. The hum of the servers in the garage, the whisper of the lithium-ion batteries, the faint electronic sigh of the inverters turning stored sunlight into the power currently running my espresso machine. The next moment, the symphony of the storm was joined by an unnerving silence, a specific silence. The hum from St. Jude's Community Hospital, the one that had been the subject of Brenda with a B's latest apocalyptic email chain, was gone. I stopped stirring my latte, the tiny metal spoon frozen in my hand. For the past hour, the hospital's massive diesel backup generator, which sat just beyond the subdivision's back wall, had been chugging away in a pre-storm test run. It was a sound of absolute assurance, a deep, throaty promise that no matter how dark it got for the rest of us, the lights would stay on where it mattered most. And now it was silent. My lights were still on, of course. My house, thanks to what I jokingly called the grid, had seamlessly disconnected from the municipal supply the second it detected an anomaly. The storm had finally knocked out the neighborhood. A glance out the window confirmed it. Every other house on my meticulously curated, beige to taupe street was a dark, empty box. But the hospital was supposed to be the exception. I grabbed the pair of binoculars I keep on my desk for bird watching and, more often, for monitoring the flagrant HOA violations of my neighbors. I focused them through the rain-streaked glass, past my sodden, award-winning Kentucky bluegrass, over the 6-foot-high, HOA-approved cedar fence. St. Jude's was a black monolith against a bruised purple sky. Not a single light. Not in the emergency room bay. Not in the patient windows. Not in the administrative offices. It was a ghost ship. My blood ran cold. This was wrong. This was existentially, fundamentally wrong. A hospital that size doesn't just go dark. They have protocols. They have redundancies for their redundancies. The municipal grid fails, and a 30-ton diesel engine that could power a small village is supposed to roar to life in less than 30 seconds. Their uninterruptible power supplies, the big battery backups for the most critical machines, could maybe carry the ICU for 15-20 minutes tops. But the rest of the building, the lights, the pumps, the diagnostic equipment, they were dead in the water. My watch read 10:17 p.m. The power had gone out a full minute ago. The generator should have been running for at least 30 seconds. My gaze drifted from the dark, silent hospital back to my own house, an obscene beacon of light and stability. Then to the garage, the nerve center of it all. An idea sparked in my mind. It was a terrible, stupid, insane, highly illegal, and deeply irresponsible idea. It was also, quite possibly, the only idea anyone had. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the storm. I looked back at the hospital, a hulking shape full of people who were having a far, far worse night than I was. People on ventilators, babies in incubators, surgeons halfway through a procedure. My watch ticked over to 10:19 p.m. 3 minutes of darkness. The latte was forgotten. I snatched my phone from the desk, my fingers fumbling on the slick screen. I had to make a call. And I had the sickening feeling that my quiet, comfortable, semi-retired life was about to get very, very complicated. How in the hell did I get here? How did my life become a low-budget disaster movie directed by the head of a suburban homeowners association? It all started, as most of my problems did, with a piece of high-quality, cream-colored cardstock being slid under my front door. 2 weeks earlier, the world was simple. My biggest problem was Brenda. Brenda with a B, as I called her in my head, to distinguish her from the other, presumably less tyrannical Brendas of the world. She was the president, chairman, and supreme commander of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, and her reign was one of absolute, pedantic terror. I'd bought my house in this beige utopia for one reason. It was quiet. After selling my software startup, all I wanted was a peaceful corner of the world to pursue my true passion. Not golf, not woodworking, not restoring a classic car. My passion was total, unadulterated self-sufficiency. I was obsessed with creating a home that was a closed-loop system, a fortress of solitude that thumbed its nose at the fragile infrastructure of the modern world. My 3-car garage was not for cars. It was the command center. It was my masterpiece. Where other men displayed vintage Corvettes, I had a gleaming server rack managing the home's automation. Where there should have been lawn mowers and gardening tools, there was a wall of deep-cycle, military-grade lithium-ion phosphate batteries, each the size of a suitcase. I'd acquired them from a government auction for a decommissioned communications outpost. Getting them shipped without raising a Homeland Security flag was a story in itself. The crown jewel was the roof. It wasn't just dotted with solar panels, it was practically made of them. High-efficiency, photovoltaic cells that drank in the sun and poured electricity into my batteries. On a good day, I could generate enough power to run my house, my neighbor Dave's house, and still have enough left over to charge a fleet of Teslas. I called it the grid, and it was the culmination of years of planning, coding, and a significant chunk of my buyout money. To Brenda, however, it was an affront, a blight, a personal insult to the carefully crafted aesthetic of Whispering Pines. My feud with her was legendary. It began when I painted my front door provocative plum instead of the board-approved benign burgundy. It escalated when she measured the blades of my grass with a ruler and found them to be a 1/4 inch over the regulation 3 inches. It reached a fever pitch with the tomatoes. I'd dared to grow beefsteak tomatoes in a planter on my porch. She called it unauthorized experimental horticulture. So when I found the latest cream-colored envelope, I knew it would be special. I opened it. The official letterhead shimmered with passive aggression. HOA violation notice hash 734B, unauthorized reflectivity. My eyebrows shot up. That was a new one. The letter, penned in Brenda's flawlessly condescending prose, explained that my new solar panels were reflecting an unacceptable level of solar glare onto her property between the hours of 9:15 a.m. and 9:47 a.m. This glare, she claimed, was causing significant emotional distress to her prize-winning petunias. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. My solar panels were too sunny. I was being fined for generating clean energy too efficiently. I crumpled the notice and tossed it in the recycling bin, which I knew for a fact Brenda had once reported for being excessively green. The incident that truly set the stage for the coming chaos, however, came in the form of an email. A week after the reflectivity complaint, with a massive storm system bearing down on the state, Brenda sent out a mass email to the entire neighborhood. Subject: urgent. Noise ordinance violation and gross municipal disregard. Esteemed residents, it has come to my attention that the St. Jude's Community Hospital is, once again, testing their deafeningly loud backup power generator. This incessant, grating industrial noise is a clear violation of Section 4, Paragraph B of the Whispering Pines Agreement regarding auditory pollution. I have already lodged a formal complaint with the hospital administrator, a shockingly dismissive woman who claimed it was for patient safety. I argue that the mental and auditory well-being of the tax-paying residents of this community is also a safety issue. This will not stand. I am exploring all legal avenues. The auditory harmony of our community is non-negotiable. I read the email and laughed out loud. It was the most Brenda thing I had ever read. She was trying to file an HOA complaint against a hospital's life support system. I typed out a sarcastic reply. A habit of mine. Dear Brenda, have you tried asking the sick people to be less inconsiderate? Perhaps they could schedule their critical surgeries and life-threatening emergencies around your morning yoga sessions. Just a thought. Best, Jack. I savored it for a moment, the petty glee warming me before deleting it. Engaging Brenda was like wrestling a pig in mud. You both get dirty, and you quickly realize the pig enjoys it. That night, the storm hit. As the neighborhood lights flickered and died, I sat in my glowing home, smug and secure, the memory of Brenda's email about the generator fresh in my mind. And that's when the humming stopped. That's when I found myself staring through binoculars at a dead hospital, my own private power grid humming in stark, sickening contrast. The memory of Brenda's words, "This will not stand," echoed in my head, no longer funny, but terrifying. My watch read 10:21 p.m. 4 minutes. 4 minutes the hospital had been dark. My fingers, now surprisingly steady, flew across my phone's screen, pulling up a number from my contacts list. A number for a friend who knew about big power. A friend who owed me a favor after I'd untangled her home network from a ransomware attack. I pressed call. "Maria," I said when she picked up, my voice tight. "Hypothetical question, and I need you to skip the part where you tell me I'm insane." "Jack, what did you do?" Maria's voice was a mixture of exhaustion and ingrained suspicion, the default tone of anyone who'd worked in municipal power grid management for more than a decade. "Is this about your HOA again? Did you try to build a death ray to trim your neighbor's hedge?" "Tempting, but no," I said, pacing my office. The rain hammered against the windows like angry fists. "Listen, the power's out here. The whole area, including St. Jude's." "Okay. And their backup generator isn't running? That's weird. Maintenance issue, probably. Their internal UPS will keep the critical stuff online for a few minutes until they get it sorted." "Maria, it's been 5 minutes," I said, my voice dropping. "The hospital is a black hole. They aren't getting it sorted. So, hypothetical question. If a person had, say, a massive private power source, and a hospital next door lost all power, including their primary backup, how would one theoretically plug it in?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the calculations of liability, physics, and federal regulations. "Jack," she said slowly, the humor completely gone from her voice. "You can't just backfeed the grid. You'll energize a downed line, create an islanding effect, and probably kill a lineman trying to fix the original problem. You'd go to federal prison for the rest of your natural life." "Not the grid. Forget the grid. I'm talking about a direct connection, like a giant life-saving extension cord running from my garage to their front door." Another pause. "Your garage? Jack, what exactly have you built over there? The last time I visited, you were trying to get your coffee maker on its own IP address." "I've made some upgrades," I said evasively. "Think less smart home, more personal power station. The hospital is dark, Maria. St. Jude's is dark." The gravity in my voice finally cut through her skepticism. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Their generator failed completely? The whole unit?" Okay, theoretically. You'd need to get to their main transfer switch. Isolate them completely from the municipal intake. Then you'd have to run heavy-gauge feeder cables directly to their service panel. We're talking 4 zeroths copper at least. You'd need a way to synchronize the phase of your power to match what their systems expect, or you'll fry every sensitive piece of equipment they have. Jack, you can't do this with a set of jumper cables from your Prius. You need professionals. Real ones." "I know," I said, stopping in front of the window overlooking my pristine, soon-to-be-destroyed lawn. "That's why I called you. Who do you call when a skyscraper's electrical system melts down at 3 a.m.? Who are the guys who do emergency commercial work and don't ask too many questions until the check clears? Maria sighed, a long, weary sound that spoke of a career filled with cowboys and madmen. You're actually going to do this. You're going to plug your garage into a hospital. I am. Okay, she said, resigned. There's a company. They're legendary and certifiably insane. They call themselves the Kilowatt Cowboys. They're obscenely expensive. They look like they belong in a biker bar. But they are the best damn emergency electrical contractors on the planet. I'll text you the number. Tell them it's a code black situation. They'll understand the urgency. She paused. Jack, for the love of God, be careful. Always am, I lied and hung up. My phone buzzed with a new text, a number and the name Gus Kilowatt Cowboys. I took a deep breath, the air in the room suddenly feeling thin and electric. I dialed. A gravelly voice answered on the first ring. Yeah? Hi, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I was told to call you. I have a code black situation, and it's a weird one. 25 minutes later, my quiet, suburban street looked like a scene from a Michael Bay movie. A massive, lifted Ford F-350, bristling with antennas and sporting a bank of roof-mounted spotlights that cut through the storm like lasers, screeched to a halt in my driveway. The water on the asphalt sizzled and steamed where its tires stopped. 2 men climbed out. The driver, Gus, was built like a vending machine, with a graying beard and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and then left out in the rain for 40 years. The passenger, Leo, was younger, leaner, with a mess of dark hair and the quick, intelligent eyes of someone who sees the world in schematics. They were both decked out in heavy-duty rain gear that made them look like deep-sea fishermen ready to battle a kraken. You the code black? Gus yelled over the wind, his voice like rocks in a tumbler. Where's the site? Corporate tower? Data center? In here, I shouted back, gesturing to my unassuming 3-car garage. Gus and Leo exchanged a look that clearly communicated their shared belief that they were dealing with a moron. Buddy, Leo said, his tone dripping with condescension as he walked up to me, water sluicing off his jacket. A code black isn't when your beer fridge and your Xbox stop working at the same time. This is a $5,000 call-out fee just for showing up. You sure you want to pay that? I ignored the insult. The fee is fine. The target isn't my fridge, I said, pointing a dramatic, rain-soaked finger through the darkness. It's that. They both turned, following my finger. Their professional-grade flashlights cut through the downpour, illuminating the dark, dead mass of St. Jude's Hospital. And the source, I added, turning to the garage door and hitting the opener on my keypad, is in here. The door rumbled upwards, revealing the softly glowing interior of the command center. The effect was instantaneous and deeply satisfying. The Kilowatt Cowboys, 2 men who had probably seen every kind of electrical disaster known to man, just stood there, mouths slightly agape, as the rain dripped from their faces. They stared at the neat rows of humming servers, the perfectly organized conduits running along the walls, the multiple monitors displaying their silent, glowing green data, and the centerpiece of it all. The wall of industrial batteries, each with its own tiny LED status indicator, blinking in a hypnotic, synchronized rhythm. Leo was the first to speak, his voice a reverent whisper. Whoa, it's beautiful. Holy crap, is that a Schneider Electric Connext XW Plus inverter array? Configured in a parallel stack? Gus, a man I doubted was impressed by much, walked slowly into the garage as if entering a shrine. He ran a hand over the casing of one of my batteries, then tapped it with his knuckle. Military-grade LFP, he grunted, looking at me with newfound respect. Lithium ion phosphate, sealed units. Where in the hell did you get these, kid? Let's just say a government auction, a very creative bill of lading, and a shipping company that specializes in don't ask, don't tell, I said. So, the question stands. Can we do it? Can we plug my garage into that hospital? Leo was already pulling a ruggedized laptop from his bag. His earlier condescension replaced by a manic, excited energy. He was a kid who'd just been handed the keys to the world's best toy store. Pulling up the hospital's public electrical schematics now, he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. They're running a 480-volt, three-phase system, standard for a facility that size. Gus was pacing my driveway, his eyes measuring the distance, the terrain, the obstacles. He was all business now. It's about 100 yards, across the greenbelt. We'll have to trench it. Need to run three-phase 4/0 feeder cables, thick as your arm. He glanced at my perfectly manicured lawn, then back at me. Gonna destroy your yard. The grass will grow back, I said. The people in there might not. First things first, Leo chimed in, not looking up from his screen. We have to get to their main transfer switch and isolate them from the municipal grid. If we energize this thing while it's still connected, we'll backfeed all the way to the substation. Bad things happen. Your phase is clean, Gus said, pointing at one of my monitors, which displayed a perfect emerald green sine wave. Surprisingly clean. We can sync to it, no problem. He finally stopped pacing and stood in front of me, rain plastering his gray hair to his forehead. He looked from my ridiculously powerful garage to the dead hospital, and a slow grin spread across his face. It was the grin of a man who lives for impossible jobs. It's gonna be sketchy as hell, he said, his voice booming with enthusiasm. The trenching will violate every city ordinance on the books, and your HOA is going to have a collective aneurysm that will register on the Richter scale. He cracked his knuckles, a sound like small trees snapping. But yeah, kid, we can do it. He turned to his truck. Leo, fire up the ditch witch. Let's go save some lives. The ditch witch, a compact and terrifyingly efficient trenching machine, tore through my award-winning lawn like a shark through water. It left a raw, muddy scar in its wake, churning up the Kentucky bluegrass, the intricate sprinkler system, and 3 years of painstaking landscape maintenance. I winced with every foot of destroyed turf, but the sight of Gus and Leo unspooling massive, python-thick black cables into the fresh trench was a strangely comforting distraction. This was organized chaos. This was progress. The progress, however, was about to be interrupted by the inevitable. The flashing red and blue lights painted the houses across the street before I heard the siren. A police cruiser, gliding silently through the storm-ravaged street, pulled up and parked at a sharp angle behind the cowboy's truck, blocking my driveway. 2 officers got out. The first, older, with a mustache that had seen its share of stakeouts and bad coffee, moved with a weary resignation. His name tag read Miller. The second was younger, sharper, with a ramrod-straight posture and an expression that said he had memorized the entire municipal code for fun. His tag read Sanchez. Evening, sir, Officer Miller said, his voice calm and even, but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. He gestured vaguely at the trench, the truck, the cables, and me standing in my doorway like the mad scientist in a B-movie. We're getting a lot of calls. About this. Let me guess, I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. Brenda? Miller's eyebrow twitched in what I took for confirmation. The calls mention unauthorized industrial work, destruction of property, and one particularly colorful caller suggested a man was attempting to steal the neighborhood's electricity by sucking it through the ground. That's my Brenda, I thought. always painting with such vivid, paranoid strokes. "Officers, I can assure you it's not what it looks like," I said. "Sir," Officer Sanchez interjected, his eyes scanning the scene with clinical disapproval. "You are operating heavy machinery in a residential zone after 10 p.m. You are performing unpermitted excavation and electrical work. You're running what appears to be industrial-grade conduit across private property in the middle of a city-wide power outage. With all due respect, this is exactly what it looks like. We're going to need you to shut this all down. Right now?" My stomach clenched. Gus and Leo had already made it to the low brick wall separating my property from the hospital greenbelt. They were working with a frantic urgency. We didn't have time for bureaucracy. As if on cue, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Maria. I answered, putting it on speaker. "Jack, I just got off the phone with Dr. Evans, the hospital administrator. I told her some civilian help was on the way. She said they're manually bagging patients in the ICU. The ventilator batteries are failing. They have maybe 10 more minutes before they have to start making choices." "Triage choices. Where are you at?" The air went still. The rain, the wind, everything seemed to fade away, leaving only Maria's stark, terrifying words hanging in the air. "Triage choices." I looked at the two cops, my face pale. "You heard her," I said, my voice hoarse. "Look," I pointed at the hospital. "St. Jude's is dark. Their generator is down. I'm trying to get them power. These guys," I gestured to the cowboys, who were now trying to heave a massive coil of cable over the wall, "are the best in the business. Every single second you spend talking to me, the clock is ticking on someone's grandmother." Miller and Sanchez looked at each other. My story was insane. Certified grade A bonkers. But the evidence was right in front of them. The hospital was undeniably, terrifyingly dark. The urgency in Maria's voice had been real. This was no longer about a noise complaint or a destroyed lawn. Officer Sanchez was still skeptical. "Sir, this is a massive liability. We can't just take your word for it. You could blow up half the block." "He's right, kid," Gus shouted from the wall, having overheard us. "This is a real Hail Mary, but it's the only one on the field." Officer Miller, his face a mask of conflict, looked from my desperate eyes to the dark hospital, then back again. He seemed to come to a decision. He keyed the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is 3 Adam 12. Can you confirm the operational status of St. Jude's Community Hospital? We have a visual, looks dark. Is their backup power active?" The radio crackled for a moment before a calm, female voice responded. "Negative, 3 Adam 12. We are receiving multiple 911 calls from within the hospital. Reports of total power failure. Central Command confirms multiple critical life support systems are down. All inbound EMS is being rerouted to County General. I repeat, St. Jude's is code black." Miller lowered the radio. The official confirmation seemed to settle something in his weary eyes. He looked at Sanchez, who gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod. The by-the-book cop was on board. Miller turned to me. "Okay, you've got 5 minutes to convince me you're not a complete and total lunatic who's going to get us all fired or killed. Then we're shutting you down. Start talking." Before I could even begin my explanation, a new figure appeared, marching across the muddy ruin of my lawn like a vengeful spirit. Dressed in a bright yellow raincoat and brandishing a comically large, heavy-duty flashlight like a weapon, it could only be one person. "Officers! Thank goodness you're here!" Brenda's voice cut through the storm, sharp and shrill. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association, and I want this man arrested immediately." I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. Of course, the final boss had arrived. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of handling the situation," Officer Miller said, his patience already wearing thin. "What's the specific complaint?" Everything! Brenda shrieked, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across my face, the muddy trench and the police car. The noise, the mud, the flagrant violation of at least a dozen bylaws. He has turned our peaceful, harmonious community into a filthy construction site. He is clearly the reason for the power outage. I couldn't help myself. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the accusation was too much to bear in silence. Brenda, I'm flattered you think my garage has that kind of juice, but I'm pretty sure it's not connected to the regional power grid. I'd remember installing that. She ignored me completely, her entire focus on the two men with badges, the only authority she recognized besides her own. He has illegal machinery. He's probably running some kind of illicit crypto mining farm that sucked the power out of the whole state. It's people like him, with their gadgets and their disregard for rules, that are ruining this country. You have to stop him. Just as Brenda was winding up for what was sure to be a spectacular crescendo of suburban outrage, a new set of figures emerged from the darkness near the back wall. A woman in blue scrubs, her face etched with panic and exhaustion, was half running, half stumbling across the wet grass, escorted by a hospital security guard. "Are you the one?" the woman yelled, her voice cracking. "The one with the power grid? Maria from the city called me. I'm Dr. Evans, the hospital administrator. Please, God, tell me this is real." "I'm Jack," I said, my voice suddenly feeling small. "We're working on it. These guys are the contractors." Brenda stared, utterly bewildered by this new development. Her narrative was being hijacked. "Dr. Evans? What are you doing fraternizing with this menace?" Dr. Evans, who looked like she hadn't slept in a week and had just aged a decade in the last hour, spun on Brenda. All the practiced calm of a hospital administrator vanished, replaced by pure, uncut fury. "A menace?" she snarled, taking a step toward Brenda, who instinctively recoiled. "Ma'am, my hospital is dying. Right now. I have a team in the NICU manually keeping 6 premature babies breathing because their incubators are dead. I have a surgeon standing over an open chest cavity with a flashlight in his teeth. Our main generator didn't just fail, it was sabotaged." My head snapped up. Sabotaged. "This menace," Dr. Evans continued, jabbing a finger in my direction, "and his ridiculous, beautiful, insane garage are our only hope. The only thing standing between my patients and a body bag. So with all due respect, doctor, take your rule book, your aesthetic harmony, and your prize-winning petunias, and get the hell out of our way." The verbal slap echoed in the sudden silence. Brenda was stunned, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. For the first time since I'd met her, she was utterly speechless. The cops, Miller and Sanchez, exchanged a long, meaningful look. This was real. This was happening. Officer Miller finally broke the silence. He keyed his radio, his voice now firm, decisive. "Dispatch, be advised. 3 Adam 12 is code 4. We are on site and assisting with a civilian emergency operation at St. Jude's. I want you to secure the perimeter of this block. No one in or out of this property except for these contractors. We're on scene control." He turned to me, his expression grim. "Go," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Do what you need to do. We'll handle this." He nodded toward the still reeling Brenda. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and sprinted toward my garage, the roar of the inverters welcoming me home. It was time to plug in a hospital. The garage was my sanctuary, my cockpit. The outside world, the storm, the mud, the cops, the sputtering rage of the HOA president, all of it melted away. Here things made sense. There were variables, constants, and clear objectives. The objective now was to push about 0.5 megawatt of stable, clean power through 100 yards of copper into a dying building. Simple, right? I strapped on a headset, linking me to the heavy-duty walkie-talkies the cowboys used. Gus and Leo were on the other side of the wall now, in the hospital's service yard, working by the high-powered beams of their flashlights. "Jack, you read me?" Leo's voice crackled in my ear, sharp and clear. "Loud and clear, Leo," I said, my eyes scanning the bank of monitors. "The grid is green across the board. Batteries are at 98%. Inverters are spooled up and ready for load." "Copy that," he said. "We're at the hospital's main transfer switch. It's an old-school manual model, thank God. We've isolated their main breaker from the municipal grid. The hospital is officially an island. We are clear on this end to receive your electrons." A wave of relief washed over me. The most dangerous part of the operation, the risk of backfeeding the city's grid, was over. "But we got a problem," Gus's gravelly voice cut in. "The intake bus bar on their panel it's an antique, a real relic. Our standard feeder clamps won't fit. I have to fabricate an adapter. It's gonna take a minute." My stomach dropped. A minute? In the world of battery backups and manual resuscitation, a minute was an eternity. I looked at my own monitors, at the steady green numbers representing gigawatts of stored potential, all this power, all this tech, and it was all useless until Gus could hammer a piece of copper into the right shape in the middle of a hurricane. "Work fast, Gus," I said, my voice tight. "Patience is a virtue, kid," he grunted back, followed by the distinct sound of heavy, rhythmic hammering. "Okay, Jack," Leo said, his voice pulling my attention back. "While the old man plays blacksmith, let's get our phase synced up. Your output is beautiful, man. A pure sine wave, straight out of a textbook. But it's not perfectly in sync with what the hospital's internal systems will expect. If we connect as is, we could send a surge that'll fry every sensitive controller in the building." This was the delicate part, the digital dance. "I'm looking at your frequency on my oscilloscope now," Leo continued. "I need you to nudge your primary inverter's frequency up by 0.01 hertz. Gently now. Just a little tap." I turned to my main control terminal, my fingers flying over the keyboard, diving into the command line interface of the inverter's control software. This was my world. I entered the command, a tiny adjustment that would be imperceptible to anyone but a high-end oscilloscope. "Okay, see that on your end?" I asked. "Got it. Beautiful. Hold it right there. Steady. Steady," Leo murmured. The seconds stretched out, thick with tension. The only sounds were the roar of the inverters, the drumming of the rain, and Gus's relentless hammering in the background. Then, a new voice on the radio, out of breath and triumphant. "Adapters in!" Gus bellowed. "It ain't pretty, but it's seated and secure. We are connected. Leo, we're hot and ready on this end." "Copy," Leo shouted. "Jack, this is it. It's all you. On my mark, you throw the main breaker that feeds our cables. The whole load is going to hit your system at once. Be ready for it." I stood before the main distribution panel I had built with my own 2 hands. It was a wall of breakers, meters, and heavy-duty switches. One of them was larger than the rest, with a big red insulated handle. I had labeled it years ago in a fit of nerdy glee. "Auxiliary output, apocalypse only." I guess this qualified. "I'm ready," I said, my hand gripping the cold, rubberized handle. "On my mark!" Leo's voice crackled with intensity. 3, 2, 1, mark! I threw my entire body weight into it, shoving the heavy lever from the off to the on position. It clunked into place with a sound of deep, mechanical finality. For a split second, the lights in my garage dimmed as the system staggered under the sudden, immense demand. The gentle hum of the inverters instantly deepened into a powerful, visceral roar, the sound of a jet engine spooling up. The digital readout on my main battery monitor, which had been sitting at a comfortable 98%, instantly dropped to 97%, then 96%. The numbers on the power output meter spun like a slot machine, skyrocketing past anything I had ever seen before. I held my breath and whipped my head around to look out the garage door, past the muddy lawn, toward the hospital. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The monolith remained dark. Did we miss something? Did a breaker trip? Did the adapter fail? And then, a single pinprick of light flickered on in a fourth-floor window. Then another, and another. A chain reaction of light and life spread across the face of the building. The emergency room bay flooded with the clean, white light of a dozen fluorescent bulbs. Windows on every floor lit up, one by one, until the entire St. Jude's Community Hospital was blazing with light, a magnificent, defiant beacon against the stormy darkness. A ragged cheer erupted from outside. I could hear the cops, the security guard, and even a few neighbors who had crept out to watch the spectacle. I slumped against my control panel, my legs suddenly feeling like jelly. My hand was still on the apocalypse-only switch. My knuckles were white. I let go, breathing for what felt like the first time in an hour, and watched the steady, beautiful light of a hospital that was no longer dead. The morning after felt like a different world. The storm had broken, leaving behind a sky washed clean and a sun that seemed unnaturally bright. The air smelled of wet earth and ozone. The birds, seemingly unfazed by the previous night's drama, were chirping their little hearts out. My lawn, however, looked like it had been the site of a major battle in the First World War. The muddy trench was a long, ugly scar across the otherwise perfect green. But as I stood on my porch, sipping what was quite possibly the best-tasting coffee of my entire life, I found I didn't care. The Kilowatt Cowboys were packing up their truck, their movements efficient and practiced. They had reconnected the hospital to the municipal grid as soon as it was stable, and my system was now happily recharging its batteries under the morning sun. Gus lumbered over, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. He handed me a tablet with an invoice displayed on the screen. The number had a lot of zeros. Enough to buy a decent mid-sized sedan? I didn't even blink. I pulled out my phone and transferred the funds. "Pleasure doing business with you, kid," Gus said, a rare smile cracking his granite face. He clapped me on the shoulder with a hand the size of a catcher's mitt, nearly sending me flying into my azalea bushes, which were, I noted with some satisfaction, now slightly over the regulation height. Leo gave me a two-fingered salute from the truck's cab. "Your setup is legendary, man, legendary. If you ever want a real job, you call us." I just smiled and waved as their F-350 roared to life and drove away, leaving a surprising lack of tire marks on the asphalt. Professionals to the end. Dr. Evans had stopped by earlier, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion, but shining with a gratitude so intense it was almost overwhelming. She'd hugged me, told me the preliminary count was that at least a dozen patients in critical care owed their lives directly to my garage. She promised the hospital would cover the cost of repairing my lawn, and I'd received a follow-up email from their legal department promising a generous community heroism grant that would more than cover the Cowboys' bill. The real reckoning, however, arrived in the form of Officer Miller's cruiser, which pulled up quietly around 9 a.m. He got out, not with a ticket book, but with a tablet computer tucked under his arm. "Morning, Jack," he said. He looked tired, but there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. "You've had a busy night." "You could say that," I said, offering him a coffee, which he accepted. "So, Dr. Evans's claim that the generator was sabotaged. That wasn't just stress talking," Miller said, taking a sip. "The hospital security chief and I just pulled the footage from the camera overlooking the generator service pad. Figured you'd want to see this." He tapped the screen and handed the tablet to me. The footage was time-stamped 10:04 p.m., just minutes before the city-wide outage. The quality was grainy, washed in the ethereal gray of infrared. A figure entered the frame, moving with a strange, determined waddle. A figure in a familiar bright yellow raincoat. It was Brenda. She approached the massive generator, a metal beast the size of a small car with a comical level of trepidation. She pulled a pair of what looked like heavy-duty gardening shears from her raincoat pocket. She fumbled with a service panel, managing to pry it open. And then, with the focused intensity of someone pruning a rose bush, she just started cutting. She snipped at a thick red cable. A spark flew. She flinched back, then leaned in again, sawing at a bundle of thinner wires with her shears. She then pulled out a small, steel trowel, the kind you use for planting petunias, and began prying at a control module. I stared at the screen, my jaw slack. With gardening shears? I finally managed to whisper. She tried to disable a half-megawatt diesel generator with a pair of gardening shears and a trowel? Looks like it, Miller said, a grin threatening to break through his professional demeanor. She managed to sever the primary starter cable and the main wire harness to the electronic controller. She didn't have a clue what she was doing. She just cut things until it stopped making noise. The timing with the storm hitting and the main grid going down was just astronomically bad luck. For her, anyway. He took the tablet back. We have a motive, a weapon, and a confession of sorts. The hospital recorded her phone call from yesterday complaining about the auditory nuisance. I think that's what the lawyers call premeditation. An hour later, I was watching from my porch as Miller's cruiser, now joined by another, pulled up in front of Brenda's immaculate, petunia-lined house. Miller and Sanchez walked up her perfectly paved walkway and knocked on her benign burgundy door. Brenda answered, wrapped in a luxurious silk robe, a look of profound indignation already on her face. "Officers," she said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "I'm so glad you're here. I was just compiling a comprehensive report about Mr. Henderson's property damage and blatant bylaw infractions. I have photographic evidence." Officer Miller didn't miss a beat. "Brenda with a B last name," he said, his voice flat and official. "You're under arrest for felony vandalism, reckless endangerment, and willful destruction of property of a critical infrastructure facility." Brenda's face was a masterclass in emotional transformation. It cycled from smug indignation to utter confusion, to sputtering outrage, and finally to panicked denial. "What? That is preposterous. I have no idea what you're talking about. I was merely pruning. Near the fence line. It was an overgrown metal bush. It was an auditory nuisance that was violating my civil right to peace and quiet." As they gently but firmly placed her in handcuffs, she looked back at her perfect house, her perfect lawn, her prize-winning petunias, a true martyr in her own mind. "This is what I get for caring about this community," she wailed as they guided her to the cruiser. "This is what I get for upholding standards. You're all Philistines." I took a long, slow sip of my coffee. The sun was warm on my face. The birds were singing. And for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt truly, deeply peaceful. A few weeks later, a new kind of normal had settled over Whispering Pines. My lawn had been professionally resodded by a landscape company sent by the hospital, and it looked even better than before. The story of the garage genius who saved St. Jude's had made the local news, a cheesy, feel-good segment that resulted in a flurry of unwanted attention. Tech companies from Silicon Valley had called with job offers. The mayor's office had tried to give me a key to the city. I'd politely declined everything. The last thing I wanted was more attention. Brenda, I'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine, was out on bail and drowning in legal fees. Her reign as HOA president was over. The new, interim president was a meek accountant named Gary who seemed terrified of his own shadow and communicated exclusively through timidly worded emails. The fame or infamy of the grid had grown. My neighbor Dave now referred to my garage as the Fortress of Awesome, and his kids asked if I was a superhero. I assured them I was just a guy who really, really hated power outages. Life was quiet, peaceful, almost boring. Until one Saturday afternoon, I heard the familiar, crisp sound of high-quality cardstock being slid under my front door. My heart didn't sink. Instead, I felt a strange sense of amusement. Old habits die hard, I thought. What could it be this time? Is my new grass too green? Is my Wi-Fi signal trespassing on a neighbor's airspace? I picked up the envelope. It was embossed with the Whispering Pines HOA logo. I opened it and unfolded the letter. It wasn't a violation. It was a formal request. Dear Mr. Henderson, first, on behalf of the entire community, allow me to express our deepest gratitude for your heroic actions last month. You are a credit to Whispering Pines. I am writing to you today in my capacity as interim HOA president. As you know, our annual Whispering Pines Chili Cook-Off and Community Fair is scheduled for next month on the clubhouse green. In light of recent events, the board has become increasingly aware of our own infrastructural vulnerabilities. Therefore, we would like to formally inquire if you would be willing to lease your emergency power grid to serve as the official backup power source for the event. We feel it would provide peace of mind for the cotton candy machine and the inflatable bouncy castle. In exchange, the board would be happy to waive your HOA dues for the entirety of the next fiscal year. Please let us know your thoughts. Sincerely, Gary M., CPA, Interim President, Whispering Pines, HOA. I leaned against the doorframe, reading the letter a second time. They wanted to hire my apocalypse-proof power station to ensure the uninterrupted operation of a bouncy castle. They were offering to stop fining me in exchange for me powering their chili cook-off. A slow grin spread across my face. It grew and grew until it turned into a real, genuine laugh. It started in my chest and worked its way up, a deep, cathartic sound that echoed in the quiet hallway. The sheer, beautiful, unadulterated absurdity of it all. The world was still a deeply silly place, run by committees and concerned with the structural integrity of bouncy castles. But my relationship with that world had changed. I wasn't just hiding from it in my garage anymore. I was a part of it, a weird, overpowered, and suddenly very valuable part of it. I looked from the letter in my hand to my garage, where the grid was silently, happily drinking in the afternoon sun. I could finally see the aesthetic harmony in it all, and it was hilarious.